We celebrate God in our midst as the source of our vitality, as the cause of our longing, as the one who makes our love flourish. Amen. God, a child has arrived. Your child Jesus suddenly shines a star in the darkness. Suddenly there was hope and light, a lot of light. God, I know Jesus is also there for me, so that I have light and joy and hope. And yet I don't always feel it. Sometimes it's dark inside me, sometimes I don't see the way. I ask you to be a light on my path today, at the beginning of this year, and in the months ahead. Amen. Dear listeners, it is nice that you are here again to hear music, to hear good words. A warm welcome. Christmas is only a few days behind us. The Christmas tree may already be decorated and disposed of. Now we encounter another festive day in the calendar. Its meaning is foreign to us. Once again, this day would like to remind us that Jesus, the Christ who came into this world, is in the foreground. On the 6th January, the Holy Three Kings Caspar, Melchior and Balthasar, according to popular saying, and which should not be missing from any nativity play on Christmas Eve. These three wise men, who were actually wise men, followed the star that led them to the manger that night. They let themselves be touched by those prophecies. They left their homeland and followed the star that led them to the newborn. What are the secret prophecies for you and me at that manger in Bethlehem? Or are we following a completely different star to our star? 3 sleeping kings who are touched by an angel in a dream. The divine touches them and reveals to them the truth of the divine child. The truth about a king who will not rule with a scepter, but with the power of love. We too let ourselves be touched by the divine message of his divine love, and follow the star that leads us to that place, which in Hebrew is called the House of Bread, Bethlehem. How do we get there, and what paths must we take to get there, internally and externally? But what do these paths look like, or can these paths look like, and how realistic is it to take them at all? Do we also have the courage of kings to set out? Tells a Russian legend. Like the other 3, he sets out to follow this star, but the way there becomes for him a confrontation about his own life. Let's hear this story. This 4th king is called Corydon. He pocketed 3 precious red stones and arranged a meeting place with the 3 other kings to pay homage to the divine child together. But Corydon's mount was lame, so he made slow progress. And when he reached the appointed tall palm tree, he was alone. Only a brief message enters the trunk of the tree, telling him that the other 3 would be waiting for him in Bethlehem. Corydon rode on completely lost in his dreams. Suddenly he discovered on the side of the road a child who was crying bitterly and bleeding from several wounds. Full of pity, he took the child on his horse and rode back to the village through which he had last come. There he met a woman who was taking care of the child. From his belt, he drew one of the 3 gems that were intended as a gift for the divine child, and put it on the woman so that she could take care of the child. Then he rode on to meet his friends. In the meantime, he had lost the star and thus his orientation. So he asked the people. One day he saw the star again and hurried after it and was led by it through a city. There he met a funeral procession behind the coffin, a desperate woman with her children. Corydon realized that it wasn't just grief over the dead that made her look so depressed. He learned that the family was in debt and that the woman and children were to be sold as slaves. Corda took the second gem from his belt and handed it to the woman with the words, "Paid what you owe. Buy yourselves house and farm and land, so that you may have a homeland." Then he turned his horse and tried to ride towards the star, but it was out. A deep sadness came over him. Doubt plagued him. Did he do wrong? For a long time these doubts troubled him, but one day the star shone again, leading him through a land where war raged. In one village, soldiers had just rounded up the peasants and were preparing everything to kill them. The women screamed, the children whimpered with fear. This injustice, screaming to heaven, filled Corydon with rage. But he was at a loss as to how he could help here. Doubts haunted him. He had only one gem left, should he appear empty-handed before the King of Men. The situation for the men and the coming misery for the mothers and their children were so overwhelming that he did not hesitate long and took out his last jewel in order to redeem the men before death, the village from destruction, and the woman and her children from slavery. Tired, partly relieved, partly sad, Corydon rode on, but his star no longer shone. For years he wandered last on foot, since he had also given away his horse. After all, he himself begged, helped a weak patch here. No need for the sick there, remained a stranger to him. One day he arrived in the harbor of a large city just as a father was to be snatched from his family and carried off to a convict ship, a galley. Corydon pleaded for the poor man and then offered himself to work as a slave instead of the unfortunate man. His pride rose when he was put in chains. Years passed, he forgot to count them. His hair had turned gray, his battered body tired. But at some point, his star shone again. What he had never dared to hope happened. He was given freedom. He was let ashore on a strange shore. That night he dreamed of the star that had long guided him and then left him. He dreamed of his youth, when he had set out to find the King of all men. A voice called him in the dream, "Hurry, hurry!" Immediately he set out. He came to the gates of a great city. Excited groups of people dragged him outside the walls. Fear tied his chest together. He walked up a hill. On top stood 3 crosses Koidan's star, which was once to lead him to the child, stood above the cross in the middle. A bolt of lightning threw the tired old man to the ground. "So I must die," he whispered in sudden fear of death. "If I die without having seen you, I have wandered in vain through cities and villages like a pilgrim to find you, Lord." His eyes closed, his senses faded. Then the gaze of the man on the cross caught him. An unspeakable gaze of love and goodness from the cross spoke the voice Koidan. "You comforted me when I wailed and saved me when I was in danger of life. You clothed me when I was naked." A cry filled the air. The man on the cross bowed his head and died. He suddenly realized that this man was the king of the world. He was looking for him all these years. He was not looking for him in vain. He finally found him 30 years later. Dear listeners, I don't just want to talk about one star. The corridor followed. There are several that he discovered, I think. The star of compassion, the star of mercy, the star of devotion, the star of departure. All these stars were ultimately necessary so that in the end he would find the catch he had been searching for all his life. Whether it was the same star in the end, I would like to question. For me, it was his own star that guided him. Well, how did you do it? What feelings did you have when you heard the legend? Which star are you following? Do you follow your own or do you follow strangers? Find out, Armin. Christus mansionem benedicat. Christ bless this house, bless your house of life, your Bethlehem. Amen.